the words left Julian Mercer's mouth in flawless Korean, and across the table, his wife Amara felt her chopsticks freeze mid-air. They were seated in the private tatami room of Hansol, a Michelin-starred Korean restaurant tucked into the base of a glass tower in downtown Toronto. Snow drifted past the floor-to-ceiling windows in slow, lazy spirals, and the city beyond glowed amber and white against the January dark. Everything about the evening was exquisite. The soft click of porcelain, the warm cedar smell of the room, the 12-course tasting menu laid out with surgical precision. Everything except the words coming out of her husband's mouth. "She doesn't understand a thing," Julian said to Mr. Park Junho, tilting his head toward Amara with a grin that made his dimples show. He swirled his soju glass lazily. "Gorgeous, obviously, but there's nothing going on upstairs. She's a trophy, Junho. I keep her around because investors like seeing a stable family man. That's the whole arrangement." Mr. Park, a silver-haired venture capitalist from Seoul, considering a $70 million stake in Julian's commercial real estate empire, said nothing. He picked up a piece of galbi with his chopsticks, his expression carefully neutral. Amara kept chewing. She kept smiling. She kept her breathing slow and even, though her pulse hammered so hard she could feel it in her wrists. Julian had never asked her about the 4 years she spent at the University of British Columbia, where she double-majored in urban planning and East Asian studies. He'd never asked why she kept a shelf of Korean novels in the spare bedroom, or why she watched Korean dramas without subtitles. He'd never asked because he had never been curious about anything she did that didn't directly serve him. "And your personal life?" Mr. Park asked carefully in Korean, glancing at Amara. "Things are settled?" Julian laughed. "More than settled. I've been seeing someone for almost 3 years now. Heather. She runs my operations. Brilliant woman. Everything Amara isn't. Amara has no idea. 3 years is a long time to maintain such a situation. She'll never find out. And even if she did," Julian shrugged, popping a piece of kimchi into his mouth, "I had her sign a prenup before the wedding. If we divorce, she walks away with $60,000. That's it. She'd be back in her mother's apartment in Scarborough before she could blink." Amara reached for her water glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. She took a slow sip, set the glass down, and smiled at the server who appeared with the next course. She thanked him in English. She complimented the plating. She was gracious and warm and utterly composed, and inside her chest, something cold and precise was clicking into place, like tumblers in a lock. Mr. Park studied her for a moment, then turned back to Julian. "Your wife seems like a thoughtful woman. She volunteers at some housing charity," Julian said, waving his hand. "Plays at being useful. Honestly, I stopped keeping track of what she does with her time about 2 years ago. As long as she shows up looking good at my events, we're fine." The housing charity Julian dismissed so casually was a non-profit called Threshold that Amara had co-founded 5 years ago. It provided transitional housing and financial literacy workshops for women leaving abusive relationships. She sat on the board of directors. She'd personally helped secure $2 million in municipal funding last year. But Julian had never attended a single event, never read a single newsletter, never asked a single question about her work. He just handed her the credit card and told her to enjoy her little project. The dinner lasted another 90 minutes. Julian and Mr. Park discussed the Mercer Developments portfolio, condos in Yorkville, a waterfront project in Hamilton, a mixed-use tower going up near Union Station. Julian dropped Amara's name a few more times in Korean, always to diminish her. She was probably thinking about shoes. She'd get lost if he asked her to read a spreadsheet. She was decorative, nothing more. Amara sat through all of it with a pleasant, empty smile on her face. She played with her phone. She nodded when Julian glanced her way. She performed the role he'd written for her with such perfection that he never once suspected she understood every syllable. When the meal ended, Julian kissed her cheek for Mr. Park's benefit and told her to head home. He and Junho were going to have drinks at the bar downstairs to finalize terms. Amara stood, gathered her coat, and bowed to Mr. Park with a warmth she didn't feel. "It was a pleasure, Mr. Park." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Mrs. Mercer." She walked out of the restaurant into the January cold. The valet brought her car. A black Audi that Julian had bought her for their 4th anniversary, back when he still pretended to care. She pulled out of the lot, merged onto University Avenue, and drove 3 blocks before pulling over, putting the car in park, and gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. 3 years. He'd been sleeping with Heather Sinclair for 3 years. Heather, his VP of operations, the angular blonde woman who called their Rosedale house at odd hours with urgent business. Heather, who always smiled at Amara a little too brightly at company Christmas parties. Amara didn't cry. She wanted to, but something harder than grief had taken root in her chest. She sat in the dark car with snow accumulating on the windshield and let her mind work. The prenup. Julian thought the prenup was his safety net. He'd pressured her into signing it 6 years ago, 3 weeks before their wedding. She'd been 25, wildly in love, and too trusting to argue. The terms were brutal: $60,000 and no claim to any business assets or property acquired during the marriage. $60,000. After 6 years of managing his household, hosting his investors, abandoning her own career to be his accessory. But Julian had forgotten about Clause 12b, or more likely he'd never paid attention to it. Amara's mother, a retired paralegal who'd spent 30 years in family law, had insisted on one addition to the prenup before Amara signed. If either party engaged in extramarital conduct, the agreement was void. Julian's lawyer had agreed to include it, probably assuming it would never matter. It mattered now. Amara pulled back onto the road and drove not to Rosedale but to a condo in Liberty Village, where her closest friend Tamika Wells lived. Tamika had been her roommate at UBC. They'd studied together, dreamed together, pulled all-nighters fueled by Tim Hortons coffee and stubborn ambition. Tamika had gone on to practice corporate law at one of Bay Street's top firms. Amara had married Julian and let her own plans dissolve. Tamika opened the door in a Raptors hoodie and joggers, her locks pulled up in a loose bun. "Mara, it's almost midnight, what happened?" Amara walked inside, and for the first time that evening she let her mask slip. "I need help, and I need to tell you something I've never told anyone." They sat on the couch and Amara told her everything. The dinner, the Korean, the 3 years with Heather, the casual cruelty of being discussed like furniture. Tamika's jaw tightened with every sentence. "That absolute piece of garbage," Tamika said quietly. "And he has no idea you speak Korean. He never bothered to find out." "Okay." Tamika grabbed a legal pad from the kitchen counter. Her lawyer brain was already in gear. "First, the prenup. You said there's an infidelity clause? Clause 12b. If he cheated, the whole thing is void. I'm entitled to an equitable share of everything. We need proof. Documented, time-stamped, irrefutable proof. Do you have access to his devices? He made me memorize all his passwords years ago for emergencies. He never changed them. He never thought I'd have a reason to use them." Tamika leaned forward. "Tomorrow I'm connecting you with someone. Lorraine Chu, best family law attorney in Ontario. She's handled 3 of the biggest divorce settlements in Canadian legal history. She doesn't lose." They talked until nearly 3 in the morning, mapping out a strategy. By the time Amara left, she had a plan. Not a vague sense of what to do, an actual, step-by-step plan with timelines and contingencies and backup options. She drove home through empty streets. The Rosedale house was dark when she arrived, a sprawling stone and glass manor that Julian had bought 4 years ago because it impressed his clients. Amara had chosen every piece of furniture, every painting, every light fixture. She'd made it beautiful. Now it felt like a museum she was locked inside. Julian wasn't home yet. She went straight to his study, opened his laptop, same password, his birthday, and started photographing everything. Emails to Heather going back 3 years. Hotel bookings at the Fairmont Royal York on nights he'd told Amara he was in meetings. Credit card charges for jewelry she'd never received. A Valentine's Day dinner reservation for 2 at Canoe, a restaurant Amara had never been taken to. She worked methodically, forwarding everything to a new encrypted email address she'd created on her phone. Then she opened the wall safe in the master closet. She knew the combination, of course, and photographed every page of the prenuptial agreement, paying special attention to Clause 12b. She heard Julian's car pull into the driveway at 2:15. She moved fast, closed the safe, returned to the bedroom, changed into a nightgown, and slid under the covers. When Julian came in, she kept her breathing deep and even. He got into bed smelling of whiskey and a perfume that wasn't hers. "Love you," he murmured, putting his hand on her shoulder. She lay perfectly still in the dark and did not scream. The next 6 weeks fell into a rhythm of controlled deception. During the day, Amara played the wife Julian expected, attending charity luncheons, getting her nails done, managing the household. At night, while Julian worked late or disappeared to be with Heather, she built her case. Lorraine Chu's office was on the 38th floor of First Canadian Place, all glass and polished steel. Lorraine herself was a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who wore a navy blazer-like body armor, and spoke with the kind of precision that made opposing counsel nervous. "The prenup is sloppy," Lorraine said at their first meeting, flipping through the photographed pages. "The infidelity clause is airtight, and you have documented evidence of a sustained affair. But there's something even more interesting here." She tapped a page. "Your initial investment." Amara had almost forgotten. When she and Julian first married, she'd put $75,000 into his company. Money she'd inherited from her grandmother, who'd worked as a seamstress in Kingston for 40 years. Julian had called it an investment in their future. That $75,000 had been used as seed capital for the Hamilton waterfront project, which was now valued at over $120 million. The formation documents list you as a founding investor, Lorraine continued. That investment predates the prenup by 4 months. It's a separate legal matter from the marriage. Your ownership stake exists independently. How much would that be worth? Lorraine pulled up a spreadsheet. Based on current valuations, and your proportional stake, approximately $35 million. The room tilted. Amara gripped the armrest of her chair. But here's why we wait, Lorraine said. Mercer Developments is preparing to go public in 8 months. Once the IPO happens, your shares become liquid, the valuation is set by the market, and Julian can't argue about what the company is worth. If we file now, he'll try to hide assets, deflate the valuation, drag things out. If we wait until just after the IPO, everything is public record. Exactly, he can't hide a thing. 8 months. Amara would have to sit across from Julian at dinner for 8 more months, smiling, pretending, swallowing bile. What do I need to do? She asked. 3 things. First, we start moving money into accounts in your name only. Joint account funds you have every legal right to access. Small amounts, 10, 15,000 at a time, categorized as charitable donations or home renovations. Second, keep documenting. Every lie, every late night. I want a journal with dates and times. Third, start building your exit. Where will you live? What will you do? In 8 months, everything changes overnight. You need to be ready. Amara threw herself into all 3 tasks with a focus that surprised even her. She moved almost $180,000 into personal accounts over the next 2 months, all perfectly legal, all within her rights. Julian never noticed. He never looked at the statements. She also started paying closer attention to his business. One evening, Julian left his laptop open in the study while he took a call. On the screen was an email chain between him and his CFO discussing quarterly projections. They were inflating revenue numbers ahead of the IPO. Not quite fraud, but close enough to make securities regulators very interested. Amara photographed everything and sent it to Lorraine. Lorraine called within the hour. This is leverage. If they're manipulating financials, the OSC will want to know. But more importantly, it means he'll do anything to keep this quiet. He won't fight us on the settlement. A week later, Amara noticed something else. Heather Sinclair had been wearing a new Cartier bracelet, driving a new Range Rover, taking trips to Whistler and Mont Tremblant. Heather's salary was good, but not that good. Amara mentioned it to Lorraine, who brought in a forensic accountant. The results came back 10 days later. Heather Sinclair had been systematically embezzling from Mercer Developments for approximately 2 years. False expense reports, diverted vendor payments, unauthorized wire transfers totaling roughly $800,000. Julian's mistress had been robbing him blind while sleeping in his bed. Amara read the report twice, sitting alone in the kitchen at midnight with a glass of Niagara Riesling. It was almost poetic. Julian had surrounded himself with people who used him, lied to him, stole from him. And he'd been too arrogant to notice because he was too busy looking down on the one person who actually paid attention. She forwarded the report to Lorraine with a single line. What do we do with this? We sit on it. Let her keep digging herself deeper. When the time comes, we'll have everything. 3 months in, Amara was at a networking gala at the Royal Ontario Museum, one of those events where wealthy people wrote checks for causes they didn't understand. She wore a burgundy gown that made her dark skin glow. Julian was across the room with Heather hovering nearby, holding a tablet, playing the devoted assistant. An older man approached Amara near the dinosaur gallery. Alistair Webb, CEO of one of the largest pension funds in the country. He shook her hand warmly. Mrs. Mercer, I've been meaning to find you. That partnership you arranged between our employee volunteer program and Threshold has been outstanding. The feedback from our people has been phenomenal. I'm glad it's working well. Your husband is a lucky man. Listen, have you ever considered consulting work? We're looking for someone to develop our community investment strategy, housing, financial literacy, social enterprise. You'd be perfect for it. He handed her a business card. Amara slipped it into her clutch, her heart hammering. This was the seed of something, a career of her own, a future that didn't depend on Julian Mercer. I'll absolutely think about it, she said. Later that evening, she found herself alone on the museum's terrace, the cold Toronto air sharp in her lungs. Her phone buzzed, an email from Lorraine's forensic accountant. Heather's embezzlement had climbed to $950,000. She was getting bolder, taking larger sums. Amara saved the report to her encrypted cloud storage and went back inside. She passed Julian and Heather near the coat check. Heather was standing too close, her hand on Julian's back. Amara smiled at them both. You look tired, Heather. You should take better care of yourself. Something flickered in Heather's eyes. She stepped back. Julian looked annoyed. Let them wonder, Amara thought, walking away. Let them feel even a fraction of the discomfort she lived with every day. Months passed. The IPO drew closer. Julian grew more distracted, more absent, more careless. He stopped bothering with excuses for his late nights. He stopped pretending to be interested in Amara's day. He existed in the house like a boarder who happened to share her bed. Amara used the time. She took Alistair Webb's consulting offer and spent her days doing meaningful work. Developing investment strategies, running workshops, building a professional reputation that had nothing to do with her husband's last name. She reconnected with old friends from university. She started running along the waterfront every morning, reclaiming her body and her time. She also started drafting a business plan, a consulting firm of her own, helping organizations build equitable housing programs and community investment strategies. She had the expertise, the connections, the credibility. She just needed the capital. In 8 months, she'd have the capital. Then 7 months in, everything accelerated. Julian told her over breakfast that he had a dinner with Korean investors, a delegation from a major Seoul-based construction conglomerate considering a partnership with Mercer Developments ahead of the IPO. He wanted Amara there for appearances. She agreed immediately. She'd been waiting for this. She chose a deep green dress, elegant, understated, powerful. She had her hair styled in a low chignon. She looked like the trophy wife Julian expected. But something in her eyes had changed, and if he'd ever bothered to look closely, he would have seen it. The investors were Mr. Yoon and Ms. Kwon, senior executives from the Seoul firm. They met at Hansel, the same restaurant where everything had started 7 months ago. Julian was already seated with the clients when Amara arrived. "Sorry I'm late," she said in English. The gardener was brutal. Julian stood, kissed her cheek for show. "Darling, you remember the greeting protocol, right?" He expected a handshake and a polite smile. Instead, Amara turned to the Korean executives, bowed properly, and said in fluent, accent-perfect Korean, "Good evening. It's an honor to meet you both. I hope your time in Toronto has been enjoyable so far." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian's mouth fell open. His face went white, then gray, then a color Amara had never seen on him before. The color of a man who has just realized he is standing on the edge of a cliff. Mr. Yoon and Ms. Kwon looked delighted. They responded in Korean, complimenting her pronunciation, asking where she'd studied. The conversation flowed easily. Real estate development, cultural exchange, urban planning. Amara was charming, knowledgeable, and precise. Everything Julian had told Mr. Park she wasn't. At one point, Ms. Kwon turned to Amara and said in Korean, "Your husband is fortunate to have such an accomplished partner. Do you work in the business?" "I run a nonprofit that provides transitional housing for women in crisis," Amara replied. "I also do consulting work on community investment strategy. I've been considering expanding into cross-cultural advisory services for international real estate firms." "That's exactly the kind of expertise our company has been searching for," Mr. Yoon said. "Perhaps we should discuss this further." They exchanged business cards. Julian sat frozen, a rictus smile on his face, watching his wife dismantle the fiction he'd built around her. In the parking garage afterward, Julian grabbed her arm, not hard enough to bruise but firm enough to stop her. "What the hell was that?" Amara looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. "Let go of me. Since when do you speak Korean? Since when do you know anything about my business?" "Since university, Julian. Since before I met you. You just never asked." She pulled her arm free. "You never asked about my education. You never asked about my work. You never asked about anything that didn't revolve around you. That's not, I gave you everything. This house, the cars, the lifestyle. You gave me a cage and called it a gift. And I heard what you said about me, Julian, at Hansel. 7 months ago with Mr. Park. You spoke about me in Korean because you assumed I was too stupid to understand. You called me a trophy. You told him about Heather. You said I was nothing." Julian's face cycled through shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. "I heard every word," Amara continued, her voice flat and controlled. "And I've been planning ever since." "Planning what?" "I want a divorce. I'm leaving you. And I'm taking my investment in your company with me. The prenup is void. Clause 12 Dob. Extramarital conduct. I have 3 years of documentation. Emails, hotel receipts, credit card statements, text messages. Every lie you told me, every night you spent with Heather, all of it cataloged and timestamped. You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention. Something you should have tried doing at any point in the last 6 years." Julian's voice dropped. "You can't do this. The IPO is in 5 weeks. If you file now, your lawyers will hear from mine in the morning." She walked to her car. Julian followed, his voice rising. "Think about what you're giving up. The money, the status. I'm not giving up anything. I'm taking back my life. And my lawyers calculate my founding investment stake is worth approximately $35 million. Plus half of our marital assets. The prenup would have protected you from that, but since it's void, I'm entitled to everything the law allows. 35 million would destroy the company. The IPO. You should have thought about that before you cheated on me for 3 years, before you called me stupid, before you treated me like I was furniture. She got into the car. In the rearview mirror, Julian stood alone in the concrete garage, looking like a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Amara didn't go home. She drove to a suite at the Broadview Hotel that she'd booked 2 weeks earlier under her maiden name, Amara Diallo. A bag was already packed in the trunk. She'd been ready for this moment. The suite was simple and bright. Hardwood floors, a view of the Don Valley, a desk where she could work, her own space. No memories of Julian anywhere. She called Lorraine. It's done. How did he take it? About as well as a man who's never been told no in his entire life. Lorraine laughed. Filing papers first thing tomorrow now, the embezzlement evidence. I think it's time to send it to the Mercer Developments Board. Do it. The next 72 hours were a controlled demolition of Julian Mercer's carefully constructed world. The divorce papers were served. The board received the forensic report on Heather Sinclair. Within 48 hours, Heather was fired and escorted from the building by security. The board launched an internal investigation. Julian was questioned about how nearly $1 million had vanished under his watch. He tried calling Amara dozens of times. She blocked every number. All communication went through Lorraine now. The legal battle was fierce but short. Julian's lawyers tried every angle, claiming Amara had manipulated the situation, that she'd entrapped him, that the infidelity clause was unenforceable. Lorraine demolished each argument with documentation, so thorough it left the opposing counsel visibly deflated. At one hearing, after Julian's lawyer tried to paint Amara as a calculating opportunist, the judge said dryly, "Counsels, your client conducted a 3-year extramarital affair, publicly denigrated his wife in a foreign language, and failed to detect an employee embezzling nearly $1 million from his company. The court is not inclined to view him as the injured party." Julian's face went scarlet. Amara, sitting beside Lorraine, felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity, just a clean, clear sense of forward motion. The IPO was delayed indefinitely. The Ontario Securities Commission opened a preliminary inquiry into the inflated projections. 2 major investors pulled out. The company Julian had spent a decade building was hemorrhaging credibility. 4 months after Amara walked out, the divorce was finalized. The judge ruled in her favor on every material point. She received $35 million from her founding investment stake. She received half of their marital assets, another $12 million. She received the freedom she'd been building towards since that January dinner at Hansol. She used part of the money to buy a sun-filled loft in the distillery district. She decorated it in colors Julian would have hated: deep teal walls, mustard yellow chairs, art by local Indigenous and Black Canadian artists. It looked like her, it felt like her. She launched her consulting firm within 3 months. Diallo Advisory Group, specializing in equitable housing strategy and community investment. She hired Tamika as general counsel. She brought on 3 consultants she'd met through Threshold. Alistair Webb became her first major client, and within 6 weeks, 2 more pension funds and a national bank had signed on. She also established a $3 million scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in urban planning and community development, named after her grandmother, the seamstress from Kingston who'd saved $75,000 one stitch at a time. 8 months after the divorce, Amara stood at a podium in the Metro Toronto Convention Centre, accepting the Canadian Urban Institute's Changemaker of the Year award. The room was packed. Tamika was in the front row, grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. Colleagues from Threshold were there. Alistair Webb, Ms. Kwan from the Seoul firm, who'd flown in specifically for the event, and who had become Diallo Advisory Group's largest international client. A year ago, Amara said into the microphone, her voice steady, "I was sitting in a restaurant listening to my husband describe me as an empty decoration. He said it in a language he didn't know I spoke, to a man he was trying to impress, about a woman he'd never bothered to know." She paused. The room was silent. He was wrong about me. But more importantly, he was wrong about what power looks like. Power isn't money or status or the ability to make someone feel small. Power is knowing who you are, even when someone has spent years trying to convince you that you're nothing. The applause, when it came, lasted a long time. Afterward, at the reception, Tamika handed her a glass of champagne. "To you," Tamika said. "To knowing when to listen," Amara replied. "And when to speak." They clinked glasses. The champagne was cold and perfect. Amara's phone buzzed later that evening. A text from Ms. Kwan. "Congratulations, Amara. Mr. Yoon and I watched the ceremony livestream from Seoul. You are proof that character is the only currency that appreciates over time." She smiled and slipped the phone into her clutch. Months later, she heard through Tamika that Julian had taken a mid-level position at a development firm in Calgary. The company he'd built was sold at a fraction of its projected IPO value. His reputation in Toronto real estate was finished. Amara felt nothing hearing it. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief. He was a closed chapter, and she was too busy writing new ones to look back. On a cold March evening, almost exactly a year after that dinner at Hansel, Amara sat in her loft with a cup of Earl Grey, watching snow fall over the distillery district. The city was quiet and silver, and her apartment was warm, and the life she was living was entirely, unmistakably hers. Julian had tried to keep her small. He had called her stupid in a language he didn't think she understood, in front of a man he was trying to impress, while his mistress robbed him blind in the next room. He had underestimated her so completely that by the time he realized his mistake, there was nothing left to save, and Amara, who had listened and planned and waited and built, was sitting in a home she'd chosen, running a company she'd founded, raising money for women she believed in, and drinking tea she'd bought with her own money. She raised her cup to the snow-covered city, to new chapters, she thought, to the women who listen, to the ones who wait, and to the ones who, when the time is right, finally speak.